It all started with an innocuous-looking envelope that arrived on a rainy afternoon. The soft patter of rain against the window made the moment feel almost serene, but the contents of the letter inside shattered any sense of calm. It bore the logo of the local HOA, an organization my late grandmother Ruth had always referred to with disdain as those busybodies. For decades, she had protected her 5-acre plot from their reach, maintaining it as a sanctuary for our family. Ruth's land wasn't just property, it was history. She had spent 50 years nurturing it, planting trees that now towered over the landscape and tending to every inch with care. After her passing last year, the land had been passed down to me, as she had always intended. It was her legacy, her life's work, and now my responsibility. The letter, however, was nothing short of a bombshell. According to the HOA, her land, my land, was now part of their common area. The letter was written with the kind of legal jargon meant to confuse, but its message was clear. I had no choice but to vacate immediately or face legal consequences. Disbelief quickly turned into a simmering anger. My grandmother had made it a point to keep her property free from the HOA's influence, a fact she had always been proud of. She would have never allowed her land to be annexed. This claim wasn't just false, it was absurd. Determined to understand what was happening, I dove into the records she had left behind. Her meticulously organized files were a testament to her careful nature. There it was, her original deed, tax receipts dating back decades, and even notes she had written about property boundaries. Every document confirmed what I already knew. Her land had never been part of the HOA. Armed with the truth, I decided to confront the HOA in person. Their office was as polished and sterile as the letters they sent, filled with an air of self-importance that mirrored their actions. The receptionist barely glanced at me before pointing me to a meeting room, where I met Karen Peterson, the HOA president and their lawyer. Karen, impeccably dressed and exuding smug confidence, wasted no time presenting what she claimed was evidence. She slid an updated plat map across the table, pointing to my grandmother's land, now conveniently labeled as common area. "This land has always been part of the HOA," she stated, as though her declaration could overwrite history. My temper flared. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking with controlled anger. "My grandmother bought this property specifically to avoid the HOA. It's outside your jurisdiction." Their lawyer, a man with a rehearsed smile that barely reached his eyes, responded with an air of condescension. "The updated plat map was filed with the county last year, making it legally binding," he said. His tone suggested he thought I wouldn't understand. Confusion began to mingle with my anger. "Updated?" I asked, incredulous. "You can't just update a map and claim someone else's land." Karen leaned back in her chair, her smile smug. "Unfortunately, the county has approved the new boundaries. We're simply ensuring compliance moving forward." I left the meeting with my fists clenched and my head spinning. How could this be possible? At the county clerk's office, I hoped to find answers. What I found only deepened the betrayal. The clerk pulled up 2 maps. The first, from when my grandmother purchased the property, clearly showed her land outside the HOA boundaries. But the second map, filed just last year, told a different story, one where her land was suddenly inside their control. "How is this possible?" I asked the clerk, my voice trembling. She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "Well," she said slowly, "if no one contests a plat amendment during the review period, it becomes legally binding." Her words hit me like a slap. "She was dead," I said, barely able to contain my anger. "How could she contest it?" The clerk's response, a nonchalant shrug, only fueled my frustration. Back at home, I sat surrounded by my grandmother's files, searching for anything I might have missed. That's when I found it. A note in her familiar handwriting tucked among the papers. It was short, just a few words, but it sent a chill down my spine. "If they ever come for the land, don't trust anyone. Check everything." I reread the note several times, feeling a mix of foreboding and determination. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal. My grandmother had anticipated this, and she had left me a warning. Whatever the HOA was trying to pull, I wasn't going to let them win. This was only the beginning of a fight that would test every ounce of my patience and resolve. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that this battle wasn't just about land. It was about honoring my grandmother's legacy and standing up against those who thought they could rewrite the truth. Karen Peterson wasn't just any HOA president. She was a force of manipulation and intimidation wrapped in an air of false professionalism. Every interaction with her was a carefully orchestrated power play, and the more I resisted, the more cunning her tactics became. She had no interest in compromise, only domination. When I refused to vacate my grandmother's land, the first blow came in the form of letters. These weren't polite requests or misunderstandings. No, they were outright threats, citing fines for imaginary infractions like unauthorized garden beds. My grandmother's perfectly maintained garden, a space that had been untouched for decades, was suddenly a violation of HOA rules. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, but then things escalated. One morning, I walked outside to find that the property boundary markers, those small but vital stakes in the ground, were gone. Someone had ripped them out overnight, leaving me no visible proof of the land's edges. Then came the most infuriating moment yet. I pulled into the driveway after a long day, only to find Karen herself, flanked by a small entourage of HOA board members, casually strolling across my property. Each of them held clipboards, acting as if they were performing an official inspection. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Karen looked up from her clipboard, a smirk playing on her lips. "Just conducting a survey of our common area," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is not your property," I snapped. "You're trespassing." She simply shrugged, unfazed by my outrage. "That's for the courts to decide," she replied smoothly, her smug expression making it clear that she believed she had already won. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a calculated attack. Karen wasn't testing boundaries. She was bulldozing right through them, fully confident that no one could stop her. Frustrated and determined, I called my lawyer. Together, we began digging into the HOA's records, and what we found left me reeling. The updated plat map, the one Karen so proudly waved in my face, wasn't just about my grandmother's property. It was part of a much larger scheme. Karen and her associates were working hand in glove with a local real estate developer. Their goal? To expand the neighborhood with a private park and clubhouse, amenities that would send property values soaring. My grandmother's land was critical to their plan, a perfect, spacious centerpiece for their expansion. The more we uncovered, the darker the story became. Through emails and internal documents, we found evidence that the HOA hadn't just stumbled into this plan. They had manufactured it. The updated plat map had been filed under suspicious circumstances. The signature approving the change belonged to a county official who had retired years before the map was submitted. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just overreach or bureaucracy gone wrong. It was outright fraud. Someone within the HOA had forged the signature to push the map through, and Karen had been at the center of it all. As the pieces began to fit together, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't about a piece of land. It was about power, greed, and a willingness to destroy anyone in the way. Karen wasn't just after the property, she wanted to make an example out of me. Her goal was clear: to crush any opposition, ensuring that no one else in the neighborhood dared to challenge the HOA's authority. Even as we built our case, Karen continued her campaign of harassment. More fines appeared in my mailbox, this time for things like improper lawn maintenance and non-compliant structures. She was referring to the garden shed my grandmother had built decades ago, a structure that had never been a problem until now. Every time I thought she couldn't stoop lower, she surprised me. The lengths to which Karen was willing to go were staggering, but her arrogance would ultimately be her undoing. Each document we uncovered, each email laced with greed and corruption, only strengthened my resolve. Karen had underestimated me, assuming that intimidation and legal loopholes would force me to back down. But she was wrong. This fight wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought she could take whatever she wanted, consequences be damned. By the time we finished piecing together the evidence, I knew one thing for certain. Karen Peterson wasn't just an HOA president. She was a tyrant, and I was determined to stop her. Amid the chaos, help arrived from an unlikely source, Mrs. Taylor, a former HOA board member who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She knocked on my door one quiet afternoon, holding a weathered box of documents in her hands. Her expression was a mix of determination and empathy. "They did this to me once," she said, her voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "But I fought back and won." I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I could trust her. But something about the way she spoke, the way her eyes narrowed as she mentioned the HOA, made me believe she had a story worth hearing. I invited her in, and she began to unpack the contents of the box on my kitchen table. Mrs. Taylor's files were a treasure trove of damning evidence. She had kept meticulous records from her time on the HOA board, including meeting minutes, email chains, and even handwritten notes. As I sifted through the papers, my heart began to race. One email chain stood out immediately. It detailed plans to annex several properties on the edge of the neighborhood, including my grandmother's. The justification? Community improvements. But the real motive was clear. It was a land grab disguised as progress. Another document hit closer to home. It explicitly referenced my grandmother's property, labeling it as a key asset for the HOA's expansion plans. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. They had been eyeing her land for years, even before her passing. Mrs. Taylor pointed to a particular section of the emails, her finger trembling slightly. "See this?" she said. "Karen and her allies were determined to get your grandmother's land. They thought no one would fight back once it passed to the next generation." Her testimony was a game changer. With this new evidence, I felt like I finally had a chance to turn the tide. But Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright neon notice taped to my front door. The words screamed at me in bold, threatening letters: "Violation of HOA rules, subject to eviction." It felt like a punch to the gut. My stomach churned as I ripped the notice off the door and read it over and over again, as if the words might change. When I called my lawyer in a panic, he assured me it was just another scare tactic. "They can't legally evict you without a court ruling," he said. But his calm tone did little to soothe my nerves. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was escalating her tactics to wear me down. The stress was beginning to take its toll. Every time I tried to focus on work or even take a moment to breathe, another letter or threat would arrive. It felt like a never-ending barrage designed to break me. One evening, as I sat surrounded by Mrs. Taylor's files and my grandmother's meticulously kept records, I felt a wave of desperation. I was losing sleep, losing focus, and starting to lose hope. That's when I remembered something. My grandmother's words. She had always been a meticulous planner, someone who thought 10 steps ahead. If anyone had left behind a way to fight this, it was her. Determined to find something, anything that could help, I dove back into her files. Hours passed as I combed through deeds, tax receipts, and even her handwritten notes about the property. Then, tucked away in the back of a battered notebook, I found it, a hand-drawn map of the land. My heart skipped a beat as I studied it. The map wasn't detailed, but one thing stood out, a bold X marked in the corner of the property near a wooded area. Next to it, in her familiar handwriting, were the words, "Water rights. Don't let them take this." I stared at the note, my mind racing. Water rights? What did she mean by that? I had no idea what the X represented or why it was so important, but I knew one thing. If my grandmother thought it was worth marking, it had to matter. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. This might be the leverage I needed to fight back. But just as quickly, doubt crept in. What if it led to nothing? What if I was pinning my hopes on something that didn't exist? Despite my uncertainty, I knew I had to investigate. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. Don't let them take this. Whatever this was, I owed it to her and to myself to find out. I closed the notebook and sat back, staring at the map. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, fighting for my family's legacy, and refusing to let Karen and her allies win. The map led me to a secluded corner of the land, a place I hadn't explored in years. Beneath a canopy of towering oaks, the sound of trickling water grew louder with every step. My heart pounded as I followed the noise, pushing through overgrown bushes and tangled vines. There it was, a natural spring, crystal clear and bubbling softly from the earth. It felt like stumbling onto a hidden treasure, one my grandmother had guarded all her life. For a moment, I stood there in awe. How had I not known about this? My grandmother must have intentionally kept it a secret. Her note, scrawled in her familiar handwriting, now made perfect sense. The words water rights rang in my head like an alarm bell. Was this the key to everything? I reached out to a local hydrologist to confirm my suspicions. When he arrived, he examined the spring with the kind of reverence reserved for rare discoveries. His verdict was unequivocal. The spring was a rare and valuable resource. In this area, where water scarcity was a growing concern, its worth was almost immeasurable. "You've got something special here," the hydrologist said, crouching by the spring. "If developed properly, these water rights could be worth a fortune." I felt a rush of emotions. Relief that I finally understood why Karen and the HOA were so determined to take the land, and anger at their audacity. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Karen's relentless pursuit of the property wasn't about preserving community space or enhancing the neighborhood. It was greed, pure and simple. The HOA wasn't interested in trees or trails. They wanted to control the spring and sell the water rights to developers. The revelation fueled my resolve. I knew I couldn't let them win. With this new information, I began preparing for the next HOA meeting. I gathered all my evidence, the original deed, the forged plat map, and now the hydrologist's report. This time, I wouldn't just be defending my land. I'd be exposing their true motives. Walking into the HOA meeting felt different this time. The usual smugness on Karen's face was still there, but I noticed an undercurrent of tension in the room. Word must have gotten out that I wasn't backing down. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as I stepped forward to speak. "Before we begin," I started, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "I think the board and the community deserve to know the real reason behind the HOA's sudden interest in my property." Karen's confident smirk faltered just slightly. I held up the map I'd found in my grandmother's files. "This," I said, "is a map of my land, drawn by my late grandmother. It marks a natural spring located on the property, a spring that the HOA failed to mention in any of their discussions about annexing the land." The room went silent. Karen's face, usually composed and calculating, turned ashen. Her hands gripped the edges of her chair, and for the first time she looked genuinely rattled. "Are you seriously suggesting this is about a spring?" she said, attempting to sound dismissive, but her voice wavered. I stepped closer, placing the hydrologist's report on the table. "I consulted an expert," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "This spring is incredibly valuable, especially in an area like this. Water rights like these are worth a fortune, and you knew that, didn't you?" A murmur spread through the room like wildfire. Board members exchanged shocked glances, some looking at Karen as if seeing her for the first time. It became clear that many of them hadn't been privy to this detail. Karen tried to regain control. "This is absurd," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded more desperate than confident. "The HOA has no interest in a spring. Our focus has always been on improving the community." "Then why forge county records to include my grandmother's property in your boundaries?" I shot back. The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. The room erupted into whispers, accusations, and questions directed at the board. Her allies, the ones who had blindly supported her, now looked uneasy. It was a moment of vindication. The tides were finally turning, and Karen's once ironclad grip on the HOA was slipping. I could see the doubt spreading among her board members, the realization that they had been used as pawns in her scheme. The meeting ended in chaos, with Karen storming out and the remaining board members scrambling to save face. I knew this was just the beginning of the end for Karen and her fraudulent plans. For the first time since this battle began, I felt like I had the upper hand. Back on my land, standing by the spring, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for my grandmother's foresight. She had known this day might come, and she had given me the tools to fight. This spring wasn't just a source of water. It was a symbol of her legacy, a reminder of her strength and determination. Karen and the HOA had underestimated me. They thought they could bully me into submission, but they hadn't counted on the one thing stronger than their greed, my resolve to honor my grandmother's wishes and protect the land she loved. With Mrs. Taylor's help and the mountain of evidence we had meticulously gathered, my lawyer took the fight to the next level by filing a lawsuit against the HOA. The charges were damning: fraud, harassment, and forgery. Once the case hit the local news, it was as though a spotlight had been turned on Karen and her cohorts. Suddenly, their calculated moves weren't just a quiet internal scheme, they were a public scandal. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear they were scrambling to cover their tracks. The court hearings were nothing short of dramatic. My lawyer presented the forged documents with undeniable clarity, walking the judge and jury through the elaborate scheme Karen had orchestrated. The emails we uncovered, especially those detailing the forged county approval, left no room for doubt. Then came the testimony from the whistleblower, who bravely confirmed the HOA's deliberate attempts to deceive and intimidate property owners. You could feel the tension in the room shift. The truth was finally out in the open. When the judge delivered the verdict, it felt like a weight had been lifted. The court ruled unequivocally in my favor, invalidating the HOA's claims to the land and ordering an immediate investigation into their practices. Karen sat stone-faced as the decision was read, but the cracks in her composure were clear. Justice had been served, and the tide had turned against her and the corrupt board she led. The fallout was swift and brutal. Karen resigned in disgrace, unable to withstand the public humiliation and legal consequences. Several board members followed suit, facing criminal charges for their roles in the fraud. The real estate developer, who had been so eager to exploit my grandmother's land for profit, saw his grand expansion project crumble. What once seemed like an unstoppable force of greed was now a dismantled operation, left to deal with the repercussions of their actions. With the legal battle behind me, I finalized the deal to sell the water rights to the conservation group, exactly as my grandmother had intended. The funds from the sale were more than enough to cover my legal expenses and repair the damage caused during the fight. Slowly but surely, I began restoring the property, ensuring it would remain the sanctuary she had always envisioned.